Welcome, viewers, to another episode of Lessons Learned. My name is Vincent Feza. I'm an author. I'm the founder of Hidden Treasure Novels, the regional representative for the North Carolina Writers Network Metro North chapter. It is my pleasure again to introduce you today to Thomas Doonan. This is the fifth lesson in a series of lessons that Tom has been sharing with us, especially appropriate for writers. Tom, I turn it over to you.
Thank you for the intro, Vincent, and hello, fellow writers. Thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, or this evening. Lessons learned, number 5 is called Nail the Opening, and you need to nail that first sentence. I said it counts for double. I could probably easily say the first sentence you're writing would count for triple or quadruple. So now let's look at some of the lessons that will sort of help lead you through the importance of nailing the opening for your next work. First thing you want to do, as I cough and we bring the slide up, is engage the reader. I suggest you can engage the reader 3 different ways: through action, through dialogue, or through description. An example of action might well be Alice, texting while driving, shut her eyes the instant she realized she was running a red light. Okay, the question is, what happened? What happened might be the next sentence. It might be a paragraph or a page later. A dialogue intro to a novel could be, I shot my brother yesterday for no good reason. Again, shock. And clearly you want to know why. You want to read on why the brother was shot for no good reason. And finally, description. You could start with leather-bound fiction and historical novels cram bookshelves flanking the rear door. Philosophy treasures stacked chest high consumed half the dining table's top. Additional books slept at the foot of the bed. Clearly that's sort of painted a picture of a room, and you're wondering what kind of person lives in a room with such a collection of books. So there's 3 different ways to engage the reader. Okay. Some more additional important elements now on nailing the opening would be, I call them important elements. The first would be introduce the main character in that first sentence. I think we're waiting for the next slide to come up.
We are, Tom, sorry.
That slide popped right up. Look at that, there we go. In that first sentence, it could be introduce the main character. You could introduce the antagonist, or you could establish setting and time and place, or you could show a very dramatic situation or scene, or you could tease about possible conflict, or maybe even introduce intrigue. Probably not all 5 of those, but one of those is going to be that in that first sentence of yours, and they're important elements. A next look at nailing the opening, just some general tips off the top of my head. Obviously, lead with an important element, but then even more important, maintain the relevance of that element throughout the story. Don't just have a really cool first sentence hanging out there that doesn't have any relationship to the rest of the tale you're telling. Be aware in that first sentence, you need to pack a lot into a small space. Even though the sentence might be 3 or 4 lines long, every word counts. And finally, in that first sentence, you'll probably establish your voice. You'll show your narrative style, first person, third person, whatever you decide to write for the point of view for your story. With that said, what I'd like to do now is take 5 stories, great pieces of fiction, and look at the first sentence these authors use and sort of analyze it a little bit. The first is Anna Karenina from Leo Tolstoy, 1878. He leads with, all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Well, I pull from that as well. We're going to meet 2 different kinds of families. We're going to probably indicate that happiness is sterile and it's false. All happy families are alike. Perhaps being happy or happy family can be a nobility, wealth, or perhaps it's bought. Happiness can be bought. And then when he says unhappy families are unhappy in its own way, I take out of that, you're probably looking for unhappiness is very personal, it's very tragic. Okay. Our next quotation is Charles Dickens. It's A Tale of Two Cities, 1859. He begins, and these 2 cities, by the way, are London and Paris. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light, it was a season of darkness. It was a spring of hope. It was a winter of despair. He begins that novel, which takes place before and during the French Revolution. And I sort of see a counterbalance of elements in there, sort of setting the stage for conflict. And finally, the words that he uses or images that he uses of time, age, epic, season, spring and winter, they're big things. It's probably not going to be just a small town boy loves girl story. It's going to be much more epic and much larger than that. We expect a big picture, a big story with those words from his opening. The next opening is Oscar Wilde. I like him because he's an Irishman, but that's cool. It was actually his only novel. It's called The Picture of Dorian Gray, written in 1890, banned for a long time in Ireland and in London. He begins, the studio was filled with the rich color of roses, and when the light summer winds stirred amidst the trees of the garden, there came through the open door the heavy scent of lilac and the more delicate perfume of the pink flowering thorn. Over all that sentence, we're sort of picking up beauty, and we'll learn very shortly after that, the story's got a very hedonistic worldview of pleasure, how important pleasure is. The quotes, the words, the studio, light summer wind, trees of the garden. He's setting place, and actually Dorian Gray's having his picture or portrait painted in that place. Then we have the rich odor and heavy scent of lilac, very strong aromas, which lead into very strong passions as the story unfolds. And then finally, he uses the words pink flowering thorn, which to me is sort of an emerging danger and perhaps a deception coming, again, setting the stage for how Dorian lives his life. Two more quotes. The next one is from J.D. Salinger, and it's The Catcher in the Rye, the year 1951. And he begins The Catcher in the Rye with, I'm going to slide right in there. Beautiful. Catcher in the Rye begins, if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born, and what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it, if you want to know the truth. So for his quotes, if you really want to hear, that's sort of like a what the F kind of attitude, which carries through the book. Lousy childhood, parents were occupied. He was thrust alone. Holland Caulfield was thrust alone into life. Kind of crap. Right there in the first sentence, the guttural motions that continue throughout the novel. And finally, I don't feel like going into it. That sort of conveys detachment or down emotion and actually his alienation from life. I don't feel like going into it. And then finally, one more brief opening that sort of then set the stage for a novel. This is Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451, 1954. Two sentences, but I snuck them both in. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and charred. First, we get shock, delight, and destruction. Okay, there's something strange about this. It's a special pleasure. It's not just a pleasure, it's a special pleasure. And then finally, burn sort of teases us. Okay, what things are burning, what things are blackened and charred. As we come to find out shortly, it's books. It's a dystopian view of the future where books were banned. So it's sort of my take on Nailing the Opening, a quick summary of what we've looked at. We want to engage the reader. You want to do that by introducing an important element, then maintain that element throughout the story. And then finally, you're going to establish your voice. And that's a quick little look at Nailing the Opening, and hopefully that will help all of you fellow writers in your next short story or novel. Next week, we're going to look at my first short story, which is called A Quest for Love, which is a paranormal love short story. I'll give you some tips in terms of how I put this little story together. And lesson 7, the week after that, is going to be my second short story called Waiting Room Frenzy. It's a whimsical notion short story I wrote in 2019 about a hospital surgical waiting room. If you think that can be a funny place, it actually can be. And there's a look at the two covers, A Quest for Love and Waiting Room Frenzy. And I'm putting the finishing touches right now on my first full-length novel, paranormal novel of a teenage girl coming of age called Shattered by Fear. And thanks for your time, and hopefully you all have a good week and write on. Thank you, Vince.
Well, thank you, Thomas. This is, again, very, very informative. I think our readers and our writers are going to enjoy what you've had to share today. I do hope all of you will stay tuned, same time, same station, next Thursday at 1 p.m. where Tom will share the next story and the next lessons learned. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and be well.
Take care.